Re-Zero, Volume 5, Chapter 4, Part 3, On the Periphery of Madness. Setting out from the royal capital, the journey to the Mather's dominion was a comparatively quiet one. Rem had been concerned about Subaru acting up, but fortunately there was nearly no sign of that while atop the dragon carriage. Yes, Rem was right at his side, limiting his movements, but he spent the majority of the time quietly in his seat, gazing absent-mindedly at the scrolling landscape. So far as she could tell, the mental issues that had caused his laughter and tears had also lessened. Perhaps the change in scenery had produced some small change in Subaru's heart as well. Hope sprouted in Rem's chest that Subaru really might be able to recover. However, the scent of the miasma tickling her nose dashed cold water on her heart's expectations. Gradually, having Subaru's head resting on her own shoulder brought a faint smile to Rem's lips. In truth, she was happy that he was defenseless, guileless, completely entrusting his whole body to her. Rem knew that this Subaru was not his normal self, and that what he was doing was not of his actual will. Even so, having him rely on her like that was the pinnacle of joy. Subaru, this way, a little farther. You. Close enough to feel his breath, Rem pulled Subaru's body even deeper into her own. Atop the narrow driver's seat, they had half melted into each other already, but Rem instead rested Subaru upon her own left knee. Her right hand firmly regripped the reins as she secured his body in place. Rem was thoughtfully doing as much as she could to prevent Subaru from pushing himself during the drive. She let him occupy most of the cramped driver's seat. When Subaru's snoring seemed troubled, she lent him a reassuring hand. Sometimes she would stop the dragon carriage to get Subaru to drink some water and assist him with physical necessities. Moving by dragon carriage put a not insignificant burden upon the driver. Paying close attention for over half a day at a time, a normal person would collapse from exhaustion before the journey was over as often as not. However, Rem's physical body was made of sterner stuff than a normal person's. Her mental endurance was also strong, and more than that, the fact that her labors were for Subaru's sake was the best match to light a fire under her. By rights, I really shouldn't put my personal feelings into it, no. Subaru, embracing her, made no reply. From the look of his profile, he was still hovering between dream and reality. Rem's murmur was more for her own benefit than his. Perhaps remaining in the royal capital is not what you really wanted, but, in truth, I was just a little happy. I cannot have you all to myself at the mansion, after all. At Roswell Manor, the time that Rem could spend together with Subaru every day was fairly limited. After all, she had her hands full with work at the mansion, while he was always off with someone or other. During work hours is with sister, your free time with Lady Amelia, and you even spend some of your limited time teasing Miss Beatrice. I had to put up with all that. Uh, uh. You were always so busy. You never had time to stand still. At the mansion, you worked for the villagers and for me. In the royal capital, for Lady Amelia. Always so busy. As far as Rem knew, Subaru was always running and running, never at a standstill. Perhaps it was for someone else, perhaps it was for himself. There was no single reason. But seeing Subaru run to and fro like that put a single emotion into Rem's heart. That's why I was just a little bit happy that I was able to have you all to myself at Lady Crucia's mansion, even though I knew you had many worries. I'm sorry, Subaru. Subaru snored, grimacing as Rem apologized with a faint smile. She softly caressed the forehead under his bangs, barely a tickle, and sighed slightly. Even though I heard that you had an argument with Lady Amelia, I'm sorry, Subaru. She apologized again. She was thinking back to the day of the royal selection assembly at the palace. Rem hadn't actually been there, so she didn't know exactly what Subaru and Amelia had said to each other when the relationship ruptured. After all, Lady Amelia nor Master Roswell spoke to me in detail about it. The gist was, Subaru is at the castle, go get him. He will be in the care of Lady Cruche. I was truly surprised when I met you at the castle after that, though. Nothing could make her forget the blow to her chest when she'd found Subaru's haggard state in the waiting room at the castle. She was both concerned at his condition and convinced that he must not be left alone. That is why I am at your side as much as I can, Subaru. But half of it is out of worry, and the other half is for my own sake. Being around you has made me into a naughty girl, Subaru. Even though she ought to be thinking of him, it was there that she discovered her own joy. It was always like that when she was with Subaru. She always discovered parts of herself that she didn't know existed. Rem counted off on her fingers things that she had come to realize about her old self. I have discovered many unpleasant things about myself. I have discovered that I am lonely when you are getting along well with Sister. I am annoyed when you speak to Lady Amelia with your face all red, and I think it is most unfair when I see you playing with Miss Beatrice. But her present self hadn't discovered only bad things by any measure. I am happy when you are getting along well with Sister. I think it is adorable when you speak to Lady Amelia with your face all red. When I see you playing with Miss Beatrice, I think, he's so gentle. I have those kinds of warm feelings in me as well. She continued whimsically confessing things to herself as if the lack of a reply was a good thing. Rum's words wouldn't stop, with feelings flowing out of her that she could never have said to his face. That moment, the things normally trapped in her heart, pouring out all at once. I would have never discovered these feelings, both good and bad, if I were not with you, Subaru. That is why I have thought of my time with you as happy. That makes things difficult right now. Having expressed those warm thoughts, Rem bit her lip, lowering her head at her own meekness. Even though such gloom had enveloped Subaru, Rem had been prepared for whenever he would spit it out. Had her passive stance not brought the current situation about? If they had grown so close, shouldn't she have asked Subaru about his worries? And wasn't her own weakness, her own desire to monopolize them, the reason why she had not done so? As Rem brooded, Subaru turned in her arms, sleeping uneasily. Subaru, it is all right. Relax and go to sleep. Rem spoke in a gentle voice, breaking the train of thought that was developing into self-hatred. The forced march had indeed put quite a strain on his body. She meant to ride right through the night to reach the mansion, but it seemed better to camp somewhere for a short while. As it would be midnight in another 2 or 3 hours, and that pace would have them arriving at the mansion before the crack of dawn. In that case, it will be difficult to convey matters to Sister through her mental connection. It worked only for a given range, and only on the condition that both their minds were awake. The limitations of range and willpower were particularly strict when Rem was transmitting to Ram. It was not possible to link to Ram at the present range, and even if range were not an issue, it would soon be late at night. Yes, we should camp. Having made that decision, Rem directed the land dragon to come to a stop through the rains. The creature gently halted, breathing through its nostrils as it looked up at Rem. She left Subaru in the driver's seat, leaping down to the ground to confirm that the area was safe. Night had already fallen over the Lippus highway. For illumination, Rem had only the light of the moon and a lagmite crystal attached to the dragon carriage to rely on. Fortunately, there was a little cloud cover that night, so the light of the moon was plain to see by. There was probably little chance of being attacked by some kind of highwayman. Pardon me, Subaru. Rem picked up the boy, sleeping on the driver's seat bridal style, resting him upon a blanket inside the carriage. After watching Subaru's relaxed breathing and his sleeping face, Rem exited the carriage and proceeded to stand a watch for the campsite. She had little concern about bandits, but more than a few wild dogs and demon beast packs were known to roam the highway at night. Rem knew that wild animals and demon beasts hungry for the taste of flesh and blood were far more dangerous than human beings. But you are here too, tonight, so perhaps I have little need to worry about that. Rem reached out with her hand, stroking the head of the land dragon as it lowered the tip of its snout toward her. This was the wise and prudent creature that had stuck with her throughout the reckless forced march. Though he and Rem were the first-time acquaintances, he had shown no sign of rebelling against her commands. She imagined the Duchess family ought to be praised for the scrupulous training of its beast of burden. It was not unrelated, however, to the fact that the land dragon's instincts told it that a demon occupied a higher place on the food chain. Among the various species of dragons, land dragons were conspicuous for their friendly relations with the humanoid races. They often occupied crucial roles in the lives of mankind and were beloved for their gentle personalities. Flying dragons and water dragons required special training, and many of them were ill-tempered. Thanks to that, they had relatively little place in the daily lives of humanoids. At any rate, land dragons were well known among dragonkind for their gentleness and intimacy with people, but as a species, they drew the line when it came to all other beasts. There were virtually no wild animals so ignorant that they would willingly attack a land dragon. Plus, the land dragon themselves possessed an unusually keen nose for any kind of danger. Nothing short of a sizable band of highwaymen or a particularly large pack of demon beasts would attack them, and land dragons could sniff out such a large gathering before it ever arrived. This was the greatest reason they were prized treasures for merchants and other travelers. Rem whispered toward the dragon carriage. Rest well, Subaru. She continued to pet the nearby beast as she sat on the ground. As she did, she leaned against its tough hide, covered herself with a blanket, and she spread her attention to the surrounding area. If they departed the next morning with the rising sun, they'd surely arrive back at the mansion before noon. She would return without having fulfilled her objectives. She had to take her scolding without a single word of complaint. Even so, she at least had to work to keep Subaru from being hurt in the process. And to get him back to his old self. Surely only Amelia could do that. Rem could not help but be irritated by that. In the first place, Amelia was a very difficult person for Rem to get close to. Even Roswell, who had welcomed her as a guest, treated her as a superior now that she was a royal selection candidate. In fact, he had also ordered both Rem and Ram to get close to her. Her master, Roswell, treating Amelia more highly than himself, did not particularly bother Rem. Ram seemed displeased with Roswell's adherence to hierarchy, but Rem's regard for such things was not as strong as her older sister's. Of course, Ram was not such a fool as to openly air her opinion on the matter. Nonetheless, Rem frequently picked up hints of deep dissatisfaction over their telepathy, whereas normally she would sense very little. The complicated feelings Rem felt toward Amelia had nothing to do with Roswell. It was terribly vulgar, but Rem's conflicted thoughts towards Amelia were the product of the circumstances of her birth, the fact that she was a half-elf. In other words, because she was a half-demon. In her head, Rem understood that Amelia herself had done nothing wrong. However, the emotional part of herself just couldn't accept that. Amelia was not in the wrong. However, half-demons had affected Rem's life, their influence far too large to lightly dismiss. She still remembered how the witch cult had laid waste to her birthplace. That fact pricked terribly at Rem's heart. As a result, she'd firmly maintained her position of guest and servant where Amelia was concerned. Rem disregarded her emotions and responded to Amelia's instructions like an automaton. If no special occasion demanded it, Rem avoided coming into contact with her so that she would not pick up on her demeanor. Their tacit relationship was to never encounter the other by choice, whether their intentions were fair or foul. Time passed, and Rem had thought their weak relationship would continue unaffected by the role selection. Based on her position, she thought it highly unlikely she'd be involved in the matter at all. When thinking of her own role to play, she decided that going out of her way to support Amelia went beyond her duties. And yet, Rem's feelings towards her had changed since back then. She wondered if it was herself who had changed or Amelia. It was probably both, set in motion by a common cause, Subaru. Just the moment he wedged himself into her daily life, Rem's world had undergone great changes. And how you feel about the world changes, everything looks different, like black and white bursting into vivid color. Her work at the mansion felt more rewarding than before. No longer afraid of standing by her sister's side, she gained the confidence to approach Roswell and Beatrice more. In spite of her decision to not lend her support, she found herself exchanging words with Amelia more often. And after all, she knew they shared a common interest. And though she held the boy in her own fleeting thoughts, she knew just who was the apple of his eye. That was why Amelia remained a source of irritation for Rem. I cannot bring myself to love or hate Lady Amelia. I am indecisive, aren't I? It was a quiet night. The only things she heard were the faint sounds of insects and the breathing of the land dragon at her side. Relying only on the light of the moon, the boundary between dream and reality was indistinct. The thoughts shifted from place to place of their own volition. Time seemed to flow smoothly. She felt like she looked up at the moon numerous times, only to find its position unchanged. The night was long. That time alone was a deep, cold eternity. Abruptly, Rem was seized by the urge to sneak back inside the carriage behind her, which she was protecting. There, Subaru was sleeping with a gentle expression, too deeply to be dreaming. How good would it feel to slide under the blankets at his side, share that warmth between them? Even though I was touching him so closely until just earlier, it is a luxury I cannot afford. Rem rebuked herself for being affected by the urge, but her heart would not stop picturing the fantasy. A temptation arose, the temptation to throw anything and everything to the winds. At this rate, harsh realities far removed from Subaru's ideals waited him upon his return to the mansion. She could still run off with the dragon carriage somewhere, with nothing but her own conscience to chide her. The funds Roswell had granted her for traveling expenses were considerable. With that, she and Subaru could no doubt head somewhere and live in seclusion together. With time and continued contact with people, Subaru could move past his present childlike state and regain himself. Even if it was different from before, they might be able to share the same moments together. Surrounded by people who had no idea that they had fled there, she and a recovered Subaru could begin brand new lives together. Be a quiet life with the one she cared about, with no one to get in her way. Now that's a fantasy. Rem shook her head and, holding her knees, pressed her forehead against them, smiling weakly at her own imagination. There was no way she could choose to turn her back on everything. To even have the thought was a sin. She could never simply abandon Sister, abandon Ram back at the mansion. Sister and Rem were two halves of a single whole. On top of that, she couldn't even imagine what burdens Ram would have to carry in her absence. She was a kind older sister who indulged Rem, and no doubt she would forgive even this. That was why she could never betray sister. Roswell had entrusted Rem with such a fortune precisely because he had faith in her loyalty. Her diligent personality would not permit her to betray such trust either. More than that, I cannot leave Subaru in this state after all. To begin with, Rem was well aware of her strong personal desire to have things to herself. If at all possible, she wanted everyone precious to her to be right at her fingertips. Doing her utmost for others helped her feel the worth of her existence deep down. It was no exaggeration to say that she was born predisposed to be a maid. And that was why the effort required to care for Subaru in this state was not really a hardship from her perspective. Indeed, she would feel fulfilled if Subaru was unable to live day to day without her. But this wasn't the real Subaru. The words she'd used to reply to Krush when they parted ways came to mind. I suppose it is because Subaru is special? Yes, that was everything. She remembered his smile. She remembered his voice. She remembered his words. Rem remembered what he had said to her and the warmth of his hand reaching out to her back when everything in her life was stagnant and she was drowning in resignation. It was Subaru who had rescued Rem from the mistaken path of despair that she walked. Rem had made an error in judgment and planned to abandon those children, and it was Subaru who would save them. Even though he was bathed in demon beast curses, walking his own tightrope between life and death, Subaru had abandoned no one. Not Ram and not Rem. It was enough. It was plenty. Nothing more was required. What more did Rem need than to devote herself to Subaru Natsuki, body and soul? What more was required than the feelings burning in her chest? She would do whatever was necessary so that he could regain his true self, that she might know his company once more. And why? Because the person known as Subaru Natsuki is a bedeviled, incredible person.